I looked at 8 or 9 players over the course of the last few days. The 7 that I thought separated themselves and had a case to be in the top 5 were Benedict Mathurin, who came through the University of Arizona in my local hometown, Tucson, Keegan Murray out of Iowa, Shaden Sharp out of the G League. He was at Kentucky, and he ended up not playing this year. Then there's Jaden Ivey out of Purdue, Jabari Smith out of Auburn, Chet Holmgren out of Gonzaga, and Paolo Banchero out of Duke. Those were the 7 that I considered. If we have time at the end, we could talk a little bit about why the 2 that I left out were left out. But I'm going to start from the top down and just kind of give my 2 cents, and then we'll go back and forth. And I'm really curious to hear your opinion on these guys. So I know there's a lot of debate about who's going to go number 1. I know there's a decent amount of reporting that says it's going to be Jabari Smith. My initial interpretation is I view him lower than that. We'll get there in a minute. To me, the best prospect that I noticed in my time watching film was Paolo Banchero. And there are a couple of specific reasons why. I mean, he definitively, unquestionably, has a lower defensive ceiling than Chet or Jabari. That goes without saying. But like I've always talked about on my show, and then as Colin and I talked about a lot during the finals, I do believe that it is easier to coach a player up to become a functional defensive player, especially if he's surrounded by the requisite talent, and to focus his offensive energies in ways that are more impactful than it is to do the reverse. And we will get to that specifically when we get to Chet and Jabari, because I do think there's chances with both of them that they become role players, guys who are very, very good role players, because they potentially have some limitations on the offensive end. In my opinion, Paolo is on the low end, a guy who will one day average 20 points a game in the NBA. He actually reminds me in terms of a ceiling of Carmelo Anthony. Now, I don't see it anywhere near the perimeter flashes yet, in terms of the fact that, like, when Carmelo was at Syracuse, he was a gunner from the perimeter and deadly out there. Paolo's more a guy that shows flashes, but he's still streaky out there. Where I really see it is the face-up game and the arsenal of moves in the mid to short range. And I always talk about how the short range is kind of like under-evaluated, underutilized in the NBA. Those are those like little floaters and push shots and hooks and things that are like crafty finishes around the basket. And I was super impressed by just the overall versatility of Paolo's offensive approach, his ability to use his body for leverage to get closer to the rim. He's got all the turnaround fadeaways and step backs. He's got the hesitation pull-up jump shots off the dribble, and he's got everything around the rim. But his overall face-up approach reminds me of Carmelo. The scary thing is he doesn't quite have that great first step. And as a result of that, I think he's going to become a guy who has to turn his back to the basket often. And that will put a lot of pressure on him over the first 5-6 years of his career to really develop his ball handling more and his shooting more. Because if you do not have a first step that can consistently compromise that initial defensive player, like let's pretend Andrew Wiggins is guarding him. If you don't have the first step to get that initial separation, you have to be incredibly sharp with your handle, your change of pace, and your shot-making ability, which I do think he's capable of with his size and strength. But those are just, I have a couple other notes that I want to hit on, but that was just my initial takeaway. Where are you at right now with Paolo, Carson?
I think Paolo is an incredibly unique and really impressive prospect. He's actually not my number 1 guy in this class. He is my number 2, though. But I completely agree with you in terms of the point about offensive development and vision there, because the Melo comparison is interesting. When I watch Paolo, the guy who I see the most similarity to that has been a star at the NBA level in recent times is probably Julius Randle. I think the big distinction is that Paolo is bigger, he's more dynamic athletically, and I think he has much more ability to be versatile within an offense, whereas Randle kind of has tried to religiously stick to that point forward role and force the issue and rely on the really tough mid-range shot making, all that stuff that we saw go really south this year as compared to 2 years ago when he was a legitimate All-NBA guy. I just think Paolo has more ways in which he can kill you. I mean, he is kind of the dream modern wing big hybrid offensively, because I think you can initiate in so many different ways from him, right? He can be that point forward in stretches. His playmaking is good enough. His pull-up jump shooting is good enough. Needs to be a little bit more consistent, but he's confident, he's willing, and he's certainly solid. But you can also use him as a roll man. You can use him to pop because he has the ability to score on all three levels. And he can be a dynamic lob threat. Like, he's a 6'10", 250 legitimate plus athlete with high level basketball skill too. It needs to be refined. His decision making needs to be a little better. Taking care of the ball can be a little bit better. He needs to get more efficient as a scorer overall, and that's really a product of shot selection and some of the pure jump shooting ability. But the tools are there. I completely agree with you. If he doesn't score 20 a game at the next level, I will be surprised. In the defense, I mean, he has the tools. You never know completely with these guys because so often guys are just lagging behind on defense and they don't come into the league as high impact guys, obviously. But Paolo has the tools. He's a good athlete with a 7'1" wingspan. He moves his feet pretty well. So I think if you see him committed consistently, he's a good defensive playmaker. Like, I think he has good hands. So I think he should be a star. If he's not a star, I think that that's disappointing. But the reason I don't have him number one, I think, is just a testament to the strength of this class. And like, we're just seeing crazier prospects every year. Guys like Paolo have rarely existed, to come in at this size and level of athleticism and also basketball skill. It's crazy. And I absolutely think he should be a star.
That last part is super, super interesting because, I was thinking the same thing as I was watching the film this morning, is like, basketball players are getting so damn good. It's so ridiculous. Like, I used to think of like, a certain level of skill as a differentiator. Like when you see a player, it used to be like when we were younger, like you'd watch Jabari Parker go down the lane for Duke and do this wild hesitation left to right and then do like an up and under finish off the glass. And you'd be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe we just saw a 6'10" guy do that. And now it's like, if you can't do that, I'm not sure you can play in the league anymore. It's like, it's crazy how the league is developed. And here we are looking at the top of this draft, and I've got three massive basketball players who are all incredibly skilled already for their position, some more than others. The other thing you said that I thought was really interesting is that big wing hybrid. And this is a key, as we get into the positionless league, it's not so much that, it's all the same position. It's more just that the positions have kind of melded into combinations of each other, right? Like, instead of it being like kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's more like guard wing, and big wing. You know what I mean? And what's interesting about the idea of a big wing is they kind of have a different level of mismatch potential than a normal wing does. So for instance, like, look at how Andrew Wiggins was able to contain Jason Tatum in a good defensive scheme because he had the physical tools to match what Jason Tatum was doing. And then you even saw Klay Thompson, who didn't even have the same set of physical tools as Jaylen Brown, have a ton of success containing Jaylen Brown over the course of that series because Jaylen Brown did not have that back to the basket game to punish with his size. And even if Tatum did, he just doesn't have the physical tools over an Andrew Wiggins. Like, that type of player, that type of wing defender against Paolo might be too small. And he might have the ability to get to fight for position in certain spots on the floor where his handle doesn't matter as much, a la Melo in a face-up roll 17, 18 feet from the basket. And suddenly it's like, even if he does a hard dribble to the right and Wiggins cuts him off, he can bump him, turn his back, and immediately have an arsenal of moves to go to where Wiggins can't defend him because he's just a touch too small. And in the modern NBA, when you go 5 out, and it becomes matchup attacking, I think that can be a huge weapon. Because even Steph Curry on switches was having success sitting on Tatum and Brown's right hand and forcing them into step backs and things along those lines. A back to the basket game is so rare in the NBA these days. And it's not just post up, back to the basket, fade away over both shoulder. It's kind of like the LeBron thing where it can be like a full court post up where you're turning your back and spinning and going into moves and hooks and things along those lines. So I just, in general, also, that I didn't even hear about his wingspan. That's crazy. Over 7 foot wingspan. That's another good piece for him defensively. That kind of means at the very least, he can be a decent positional defender that can force people to shoot over the top by giving ground. You know what I mean? So I'm really curious to see. So I'm gonna guess, Carson, that your number one is Chet Holmgren. Is that correct?
That is
Okay.
correct.
So let's do this. Explain to me why you would take Chet over Paolo, not just as a player, but also specifically for Orlando, who seems to be having plenty of lengthy defensive athletes and not enough offensive creation.
So this is true. However, I would argue that Orlando drafting based on their current roster in kind of any way is probably short-sighted beyond like, trying to get another Cole Anthony. But even it's like nobody to me on the Orlando Magic roster is irreplaceable. So I think they should be in best player available mode fundamentally. It certainly seems like they're going to take Jabari. That's what really all the reporting is right now. And Jabari Smith is a very good prospect. But when it comes to Chet, I think what you said is really interesting about how you can see both Chet and Jabari becoming kind of just role players offensively, whereas Paolo, you don't see that path. I think the thing is, if Chet's a role player offensively, it's a damn good role player, like a 15 to 18 point per game scorer still, because he just is so perfectly built in terms of his skill set to fit in as a modern NBA big, I think. Like, obviously, everybody will talk about the fact that he's 195 pounds. That's a problem. But his blend of athleticism and skill is completely ideal. Like, he's a 39% three-point shooter, so the pick and pop game is absolutely lethal. He's legitimately very quick for his position and is a slippery lob threat and a massive target in there because the guy is huge and ridiculously long. So it's just like playing off of good NBA guards. Well, great. You feed him anywhere. He's a 39% three-point shooter. He shot 74% on twos in college. And, okay, somebody closed out hard on him. He's quick enough to attack the closeout. His ball handling is easily good enough for him to go out and make you pay there. He even has a little bit of that intermediate game. So I just think Chet is not going to be an offensive centerpiece to me. I don't think Chet is ever a 25 point per game scorer. I don't think it is, hey, we're running tons of offense through him in the post, because I don't know that he'll ever be strong enough to have that really high level back to the basket game. What I think it is like, hey, we have a guy who is a better Christian Wood offensively and is also, by the way, a really good positional passer. And I think we'll see more and more of that in the league, who is also like potentially best defensive player alive because he is just an absolute freak on that end. I mean, I don't know that we have seen a better shot blocker in college since Anthony Davis. 3.7 a game. It's unbelievable. And he is so incredibly instinctual there. His length is unfathomable. Like, he can just block a shot from anywhere. He's perfect as a help side rim protector. He fared shockingly well against really good post scorers. Like, obviously everything is different in the league. Like, Joel Embiid is a different beast. Nikola Jokic, those guys are going to cook him when he comes into the league. But because of his positional instincts and his length and just his IQ, like, I forget the exact number, but he held people to a really low field goal percentage out of the post this year. So I just think he is an all-encompassing defensive weapon because he's crazy switchable. Like, for his size, I mean, he's so good on his feet. And again, that length can just affect people from anywhere. So that's what it is to me, is he's too skilled and too athletic to be a non-factor offensively. In fact, there's only, Jason, like, how many offensive big men are there who are the centerpiece of their teams in the league right now? Like
2?
Like centers. Yeah, I think it's 3. I think it's Embiid, Jokic, and Cat. And
Karl Towns. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think it's realistic to look for one of those guys in every draft. More often what we see is that the most valuable big men who are outside of that, oh my God, it's Jokic or it's Embiid tier, is they're great defensive players and they're really good, efficient, versatile offensive players. I think Chet is that to the extreme. And yeah, I mean, I understand the weight thing, but I just think he is such a optimized modern center in every other way. So I'm very high on Chet. I think he's an exceptional prospect.
The weight thing just doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
First of all, I can't tell you how many times on tape I saw a player attempt to cave his chest in, successfully do so, try to go up, and then still get blocked.
Yes,
it's just so,
exactly.
He's just so impossibly long. I've heard the comp of Rudy Gobert with offense. That's the one that everyone keeps throwing around. In general, I think Robert Williams, the Celtics used Robert Williams as a great example of this too. Like, the truth of the matter is there are not any defenders in the league except for maybe 1 or 2 that can successfully guard an Embiid or a Jokic. So,
right.
like we're talking like Anthony Davis or Gobert or Giannis might be the only three guys in the league that can go head up with a guy like that and contain them to a certain extent. So like the idea of Chet Holmgren being able to guard those guys, who cares? Like I don't expect
Yeah.
anybody to. I see
Mhm.
them defensively. The way Boston used Robert Williams in the playoffs, I thought was really interesting. Consistently putting him in a position where he can roam, where it's not about what he can do in an isolation situation. It's more just he's kind of flying around, just making plays defensively. And I could see Chet, especially early in his career, when he doesn't have the physical tools to really hang in a bully ball situation. I could see him doing a lot of that roaming, and most importantly, like you guys know, I'm super high on 5-out basketball. I think it's the best way to successfully allow your slashers to have opportunities to be comfortable on offense. And even one of the subplots of the finals was Robert Williams was playing so well defensively that they played him big minutes. And consistently throughout the playoff run, whenever Rob Williams was on the floor, the Celtics sucked on offense. And whenever he was off the floor, they were great on offense. And the reason why is they went 5-out with Al Horford kind of tucked in the corner or on top of the key. So point being, like having a center who can successfully do what Robert Williams does, but also has the ability to, one, stretch the floor in a 5-out situation, two, attack closeouts, because that dude can put the basketball on the floor and make plays. I'm glad you pointed out his passing. Him getting all those reps in high school as an on-ball player, I think are so important in this specific situation. And most importantly, he could push the break, get the rebound, and bring the ball up the floor and hang in an up and down style of game because he has the foot speed to be able to do that. So I'm with you. I am very high on him. The thing, again, like that concerns me is I've seen way too many times that the guy who ends up determining these series is that top end offensive talent. Now, here's the thing. There's no guarantee that Paolo's going to be mellow, you know?
Mhm.
Like, for instance, there are a lot of players around the league that have kind of similar skills. Don't take this comp seriously because it's not a direct comp. I'm just focusing on a specific thing. But Kyle Kuzma, for instance, didn't have a great first step and had these scoring flashes where when his jump shot was going and his handle was going, he looked like an all-star, but his handle and jump shot were so inconsistent that he was monstrously inconsistent because he couldn't consistently beat people off the dribble. So there's a lot up in the air for Paolo. And obviously he's a way better player than Kuzma was, but that similar dynamic I could see being an issue if he doesn't develop in that first 5-6 years of his career. Whereas Chet Holmgren, it's like, Rudy Gobert with offense is like a guaranteed floor for him. So like
Right.
you're gonna get that really high level play at him. So I do think I guess I'll give you this. I think he's a safer number one overall pick. But
Mhm.
I think I personally would go for the fences with Paolo. So first of all, why in the world do you think Orlando wants to take Jabari Smith first?
That's a really good question, and I don't know because I think Jabari is really good, but I think he is a clear third guy to me.
I do too. I do too. Like, I mean, he's right out the gates 3-and-D guy, right?
Yeah.
But like, and he has a star ceiling, but like we were talking about how Paolo needs to develop his handle and become more consistent as a jump shooter. But like Jabari Smith's handle right now is weak by NBA standards.
Yes.
I don't know if there's an NBA wing in the world right now that wouldn't have trouble holding him in his spot because of his weaker handle at this point. And what worries me is like, would you be the least bit shocked if Jabari Smith turned into Mikal Bridges? Now,
No.
Mikal Bridges is a great basketball player. I think he finished second in Defensive Player of the Year voting this year, close to that. I can't remember exactly what it was. Mikal Bridges is a great player. But what happened this year when Devin Booker started to struggle and Chris Paul basically went down? Like, Mikal Bridges wasn't capable of creating offense at a high enough level. And so, my thing is like, there's obviously a version of his story where he becomes a much, much better player than he is. He's already a fantastic shooter with audacity rivaling the greatest shooters in the league. He just is. Some of the footage on him on tape, his coaches had to have been like he will just dribble the ball up the floor and take contested threes, like not even off a step back. Like he'll just elevate and go because he's so much taller and more athletic than everybody. And it's a super intriguing player, but I just see him having potentially the lowest floor out of these three guys, and that's what concerns me the most.
That's interesting because I actually think his floor is a really good basketball player because of two things. He is such an exceptional shooter. I mean, 42% from deep at 6'10", and like you said, it's off movement. It's from everywhere. It's ridiculous. It's highly contested all the time. He's an otherworldly shooter. So because of that, and because of the fact that he has a really good defensive tool bag, 7'1" wingspan, legitimate defensive playmaker, was over a steal and a block a game, moves his feet really well, and as a high motor, he's a good positional rebounder. To me, it's like 3-and-D. He'll be very good. I don't see how he doesn't score 15 a game efficiently and isn't a really good defender. Where I actually struggle beyond that is seeing the likely path for him to some sort of superstar ceiling, because I understand that people look at the pure shot making and they think that it is Durant-esque or whatever, like reminiscent of, the great wings. The problem is he does not separate in any way because his first step is not remotely impressive for his position. And like you said, I mean, his handle is so far away. He's upright. It's awkward. It's not controlled. And he's not even close to a standout playmaker. He's not a good passer at this point. So it's like, yeah, the pure shot is there, but you need so much more than that if you're going to be an offensive centerpiece as a wing. And I just think Jabari has a really long way to go. And it's not honestly easy for me to see him figuring all that out.
Yeah, no, he's clearly in the top 3, but to me, he's clearly number 3. And he's far too risky to take number 1. Like, how can you, and there's all sorts of intel. Like, there's intel that Orlando might trade down to get him and things along those lines. My thing is, like, with prospects like Chet and Paolo on the board, I don't know how you could go for a player like Jabari. You talk to the awkwardness is what stands out to me most on film. There is a, because we're gonna get to this a little bit here in just a second with Jaden Ivey and Shaedon Sharp. But like there's a certain amount of polish and fluidity that separates the top level scorers from the guys just beneath them. For instance, like I'll give you like on the top level, it's the difference between Kevin Durant and LeBron. Like, as LeBron is a very good scorer and he's the second best basketball player ever to play the game, but optically there's an obvious difference in fluidity between him and Kevin Durant and the smoothness with which he gets to his moves. And I do think that does end up manifesting in something like, I do think Kevin Durant's a better scorer than LeBron, not statistically because LeBron's more of a power player, but in terms of his like fluidity as a scorer, he has an edge there. And so I just think like in general, like, and here's the other thing, last thing I'll say about Jabari since before we move forward, handle in particular, there's a reason why there's so many great players around the league to have weak handles. It is the most tedious and boring thing to work on, and the progress is slow. Like, it's very similar to jump shooting in that the progress is very slow. Like, you have to shoot you have to shoot like 1,000 jump shots every day, every summer for years to get to the point where you're a functional, like dependable NBA 3-point shooter. The difference is it's fun to go up to the gym and shoot. You put some music on, you shoot all day. But like when it comes to like doing legit ball handling drills at game speed, usually it helps to have someone there hitting you to add contact, because handling, just ask Jaylen Brown how easy it is to dribble when someone's hitting at your arms. That type of development is so tedious that when I see a guy like Jabari Smith, I'm like, he's got so long to go for that handle to become functional that it just seems like more of a long shot to me.
He regularly turns his back to the basket because he's so uncomfortable with his handle.
Exactly.
And the last number I'll say that I think is troubling with him is he was 43.5% on twos. It's like, if you're going to be a great scorer, you got to get the easy stuff. You can have the beautiful, difficult shot making and the turnarounds and the crazy threes off movement or whatever, but you got to be able to get to the rim. You got to be able to get to the line. And he just really struggled. I mean, he's actually pretty crafty drawing fouls on jump shots, but like the easy stuff, exploding to the cup, just getting by people, getting those easy twos, he doesn't really do yet. So I'm with you. I think we have a lot of the same concerns about Jabari.
With his physical tools, that's inexcusable in terms of that low of a percentage. I shouldn't say inexcusable. It's just not a good sign. I liked what you said earlier too, where you were like, it's like he's not getting separation. He's just shooting over the top. And you see that a lot on like his post-up fadeaways, where it's like a good post-up fadeaway, you pound the basketball and hit someone in the chest to create initial separation. And then you spin either way into the shot. And usually if you get really good lift and you hit them hard enough, you'll not only get a shot off, you'll get a great high quality fadeaway off. He kind of just turns and fires. and he's getting smothered. He just happens to be so damn big and such a good shooter that he can knock some of them down. And I think that honestly leads to how he draws fouls. So the two guys that I cut out were Keegan Murray and Ben Mathurin. I think Ben Mathurin is a lesser version of Shaedon Sharpe or Jaden Ivey in a lot of different ways, and I'll explain why in a second. Keegan Murray, to me, athletically, I think he's going to have a lot of issues, and to me, he will be a very good NBA role player, but I just don't see him as having anywhere near the upside as these other guys have. So to me, it was a tough decision between Jaden Ivey or Shaedon Sharpe to go with number 4. And I ended up going with Jaden Ivey, but I do think Shaedon Sharpe has a higher ceiling. What concerns me with Shaedon Sharpe is he kind of reminds me of Kevin Porter Jr. a little bit, in the sense that the highlights and the flashes are so good. But at the end of the day, he's addicted to the difficult jump shot. His shot profile is that of like he hunts the most difficult shots on the floor, and he kind of fits the profile of like the bigger athlete, but the one that's a little bit more thin and spindly, easier to knock off of his line. Whereas Jaden Ivey is like that power athlete. He almost reminds me of Dwayne Wade in the sense that his center of gravity is low. He takes these long steps, guys bounce off of him. When I talk about center of gravity, low center of gravity means it really is just like fancy speak for when you're on a line. If you run into somebody, do they bump off of you or do you bump off of them? Like, to me, that it's what brings power to athleticism. And I think Jaden Ivey is the right kind of NBA athlete. The combination of power with the low center of gravity, the vertical athleticism, and the size and length to be good. But I just don't think Jaden Ivey is nearly as polished from the perimeter as Shaedon Sharpe right now. But Shaedon Sharpe, it's like, dude, how many times have we seen a guy like Kevin Porter Jr. who has all the skill, who has the shot making, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't amount to an impactful basketball player. I also think Jaden Ivey's a better defensive player at this point. But what's your initial takeaway on those two guys? After that, I'll ask you if you would replace them entirely. But with those two guys, what do you like, dislike about them, and which one would you take over the other?
I would take Ivey as well. I think he's a pretty clear 4th guy, and I think he's just got a lot of skill offensively. You know, you mentioned the athleticism, and I think he also has really nice change in pace. I think he maneuvers traffic really well. I just think he's like a great paint guard, and he has the big time pull up jump shooting. His percentages weren't always great. We'll see exactly what they end up being at the league, but I mean, the shot creation is there, right? He can get the shot that he wants. It's just a matter of making it consistently. But in the lane, I just think he's crafty and he kind of gets what he wants. And I also think, you know, he probably has more of a playmaking ceiling. I think he's too chaotic as a passer right now is kind of the word I would describe. I don't think he always has a plan, but I think that stuff will probably develop. And Sharpe, I think, is really interesting because I think he belongs in the top 5. But at the same time, you know, he's kind of a bigger question mark just because we haven't seen him for a year. And I mean, he was the top prospect in the class. So, you know, a guy like that always has the potential to be an absolute stud. It's just you're going to naturally fall a bit when people don't see you. But I mean, I agree with a lot of you said. Really impressive athlete. I think that the jump shot with him is like very legitimate. I think it's kind of all the tools are there for him to be a really high level scoring wing. It's just strange when the last time you saw a guy play was, you know, against high school talent. Like it's a weird dynamic with him. I still think his talent alone is evident on that tape where he should be 5th, but I wouldn't be comfortable taking him higher than that.
To me, the not playing thing is a huge red flag. And I put that in my notes for Jaden Ivey. Like I talked earlier about the 4 things that are difficult or more difficult to scout, and the reason why people have misses in front offices. And Jaden Ivey has this readily apparent competitive fire. Like he attacks every basketball game. And I just kind of think about, like, if I was in Shaedon Sharpe's position, and I'm not, and again, I'm not trying, I'm just saying I disagree. So I'm not, this might end up being the best decision he ever made to not play. But like, there's no way in hell you're keeping me off of a basketball court.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm healthy, I don't care if I've got an agent knocking down my door saying, hey, dude, don't play so you can get rich. I'm like, that's great. I want to play basketball. And and I sure as hell want to play basketball for Kentucky. So get me out on that court. but the jump shot is the huge differentiator in terms of the skill sets right now. Like Jaden Ivey has just a little bit of a hitch,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very in front of his face as opposed to up higher.
Right.
What
Yep.
concerns me with that is he's getting it off now, but against dominant NBA perimeter athletes on the defensive end, I think that higher release point that's a little bit more fluid that Shaedon Sharpe has is a more realistic jump shot for him to be able to
Yeah.
get off.
Mm-hmm.
The problem, so like I see on the low end, Jaden Ivey being kind of like a Eric Gordon type of player, like a box, built like a fridge type of
Uh-huh.
smaller guard who has a really good jump shot when he's set. Because like Eric Gordon, everyone always jokes Eric Gordon has like the dream jump shot for him because his elbow is perfectly tucked and it's very mechanical. But Eric Gordon had a slow release and Eric Gordon had a little bit
Right.
of a hitch, and so as a
Right.
result, he didn't have the ability to get as into his jump shot as fluidly as some of the better guards around the league do. So like it's a tough one for me. Like I would take Jaden Ivey, but I wouldn't be the least bit. I mean, Shaedon Sharpe has potential to be the best prospect in this entire class. Like everyone keeps comparing him. He himself compares himself to Devin Booker and Bradley Beal. He's twice the athlete that either of those guys are.
He is.
And so like there's a version of that story with Shaedon Sharpe where he's flat out better than any of those guys ever could be. So it's really interesting. So before we get out of here, I wanted to hear your opinion. What would your top 5 look like? And if you have a different guy in that top 5 than I did, give me your 2 cents on them.
So the only switch for me would be Chet and Paolo. So I would go Chet 1, Paolo 2, Jabari 3, Ivey 4, and then Sharpe 5. I think that Keegan Murray is interesting. I agree with you in terms of the athletic limitations. I mean, he is a beautiful, incredibly skilled offensive basketball player and, a real defensive playmaker too, and like a versatile guy. I think he'll be really good at the next level, but he's old and he doesn't have a ton of room to grow, in my opinion. So I like him a lot, but I don't think he belongs in the top 5. Mathurin is, I mean, in terms of just if you're looking at two things, which is explosive athleticism and really impressive three-point shooting, which can kind of be the launching point for any wing to just being a good player. He's got those two things in droves. I don't have quite as much confidence as him beyond that compared to the only guy who you didn't mention, who I would say is in this same tier. You had in a tier of 7. I would say there's a tier of 8, and I would include Dyson Daniels in that, who was G League Ignite guy, just because I think he's got really impressive feel for the game, and I think is really versatile. And he did not shoot the ball well from 3. I think he was 25% in the G League over 14 games. That's, to me, kind of the only issue.
The form looks okay, though.
It does. It does look okay. And yeah, I just think defensively, I mean, he projects well. He's got good size. He's a pretty good athlete. He's not Mathurin level, certainly, and then he has like real playmaking feel where you see him having these close to triple double games and he can just kind of control things as a wing. So those would be my couple guys, but I agree with the top 5. I think that Sharpe's ceiling is too high to leave him off, because after that, it's like, the best version of Keegan Murray or of Dyson Daniels, I just don't think it can approach the best version of Sharpe with that blend of pure athleticism and shot making.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Dyson Daniels probably belongs on this list as well. I'd allow that. I must have been doing something right, Carson, because our list looked pretty similar, and I take that and I respect your opinion very much. One last note before we get out of here. One of the things that impressed me so much about Keegan Murray that I think is going to be a really powerful weapon at the NBA level. I'm not sure I've ever seen a young basketball player, and I know he's older than typical college players, but I'm not sure I've ever seen a young player other than post players, because you'll see guys like Jahlil Okafor that have this type of skill set, but it's very rare to see a young basketball player who's primarily a wing, even though he's kind of like a wing big, like Paolo is, who's this comfortable with his back to the basket. He can turn over both shoulders. He can keep his dribble alive. He's really good at finishing over the top of smaller defenders when he's closer to the basket with those like classic bank shots, like half hook bank shots. And then he's incredible with deep seals. Like he's very good at obtaining quick post position and then getting a catch and quickly scoring, making himself available for a post entry in a quick score. That, I think, he's the kind of guy that, like, I could see a guy like Keegan Murray. He won't make it to Golden State, but I could see a guy like that thriving for a really smart basketball team that is good at getting players like him easy opportunities elsewhere on the floor.